Johnny Cash hardly needs an introduction. He was more than just a singer or songwriter. He was a presence, a force, and for many, the very definition of American music. Known for his deep baritone voice, his somber stage presence, and that iconic image in black, Cash was someone who spoke to people across generations. His songs were filled with grit, heartbreak, rebellion, and faith. He was at once a sinner and a saint in the eyes of his fans, a man whose life reflected the struggles of ordinary people, yet who stood as a towering figure in music history. Over the course of his long career, Johnny Cash gave the world a catalog of unforgettable songs. From Ring of Fire to One Piece at a Time, his music carried that raw storytelling power that made listeners stop, listen, and feel. But what might surprise you is that one of his most successful and iconic songs, the very song that gave him his first #1 hit, was actually the one he personally disliked the most. That song was I Walk the Line, released in May of 1956 on his debut album With His Hot and Blue Guitar. I Walk the Line was a simple country tune just under 3 minutes long, yet it carried a message that resonated far beyond its sound. Written by Cash himself, the song was a pledge of devotion to his first wife, Vivienne Liberto. At the time, Cash was a young man just starting out in the music industry, often away from home, and the lyrics were his promise to remain faithful. Lines like, "As sure as night is dark and day is light, I keep you on my mind both day and night," were words of loyalty and love. The song struck a chord immediately, climbing to #1 on the Billboard charts and staying there for weeks. In fact, it remained on the charts for over 43 weeks and sold more than 2 million copies, a monumental achievement for a rising country artist. It wasn't just a commercial success. It became a cultural landmark. Generations later, when Hollywood made a film about Cash's life in 2005, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon, the movie carried the same title, Walk the Line. The song had become inseparable from Johnny Cash's identity, a shorthand for his music, his career, and even his legacy. But here's the twist. Johnny Cash didn't like it. As shocking as that may sound, Cash admitted that despite its popularity, I Walk the Line was his least favorite of all his tracks. According to reports, after hearing the song on the radio for the first time, he confessed to Sam Phillips, the legendary head of Sun Records, that he wasn't happy with how it sounded. In fact, he even asked Phillips to stop sending it out. Cash felt the recording was awkward, that it didn't capture the sound he wanted in the studio. To the public, the song was a perfect piece of country devotion, but to Cash, it was flawed. That's one of the ironies of music history. Sometimes the song that defines an artist, the one that fans cherish for decades, is the very song the artist feels disconnected from. Cash would later reflect, saying, "I was newly married at the time, and I suppose I was laying out my pledge of devotion." He respected what the song meant. But it never sat comfortably with him as an artist. Of course, Cash was never the type of man to chase only popularity. His career proved that again and again, especially when he used his voice to highlight uncomfortable truths. That same man who sang promises of devotion in I Walk the Line also released one of the most controversial protest songs of the 1960s, the Ballad of Ira Hayes. Unlike I Walk the Line, which soared effortlessly to commercial success, the Ballad of Ira Hayes faced rejection. Written by folk singer Peter Lafarge and recorded by Cash in 1964, the song told the tragic true story of Ira Hayes, a Native American soldier who helped raise the American flag at Iwo Jima. While hailed as a war hero, Hayes returned home to face racism, neglect, and despair. His story was both inspiring and heartbreaking, and Cash wanted the world to hear it. He included the track on his 20th album, Bitter Tears, a concept album dedicated entirely to the plight of Native Americans, a subject close to Cash's heart, as he often spoke of his partial indigenous ancestry. But while the song's message was powerful, its timing was complicated. The 1960s were marked by the civil rights movement, and not all audiences wanted to confront uncomfortable realities about racism and injustice. Country music radio in particular resisted. Many stations flat out refused to play the record, claiming it was too controversial and too heavy for their listeners. But Johnny Cash was not a man who took rejection quietly. Instead of backing down, he doubled down. He took out a full-page ad in Billboard magazine, a fiery open letter directed at DJs, radio station managers, and owners. The ad began bluntly, "DJs, station managers, owners, etc. Where are your guts?" He challenged them, accusing them of being cowards for refusing to air the song. He even reminded them that teenage girls, who often cried at sad movies, were capable of handling tough truths in music too. The letter shook the industry. Some insiders were furious, even going so far as to threaten stripping Cash of his Country Music Association membership. Others reconsidered and began playing the song. In the end, the Ballad of Ira Hayes climbed to number 3 on the Billboard country charts, proving that Cash's stubbornness paid off. More importantly, it cemented his reputation as not just an entertainer, but an advocate, someone willing to risk his career to sing about justice and truth. This contrast between I Walk the Line and the Ballad of Ira Hayes reveals so much about who Johnny Cash was as an artist. On one side, he was a man who could write simple, heartfelt promises of loyalty that millions would embrace. On the other, he was a fighter, unafraid to confront injustice and call out the very system that made him famous. Cash's relationship with his own music was always complicated. He loved storytelling, but he didn't always love the way his songs came out. He loved his fans, but he was also determined not to compromise his own values just to please them. That's part of what made him so enduring. His contradictions, faithful yet rebellious, humble yet outspoken, mirrored the contradictions in all of us. When Johnny Cash passed away in 2003, just months after losing his beloved wife, June Carter, tributes poured in from across the world. Fans remembered him for the classics, Ring of Fire, Folsom Prison Blues, Man in Black, and of course, I Walk the Line. Ironically, the song he disliked the most was also the one that many chose to remember him by. That's the strange gift of music. It belongs to the world once it leaves the artist's lips, and yet his legacy is more than any single track. It's in his willingness to speak out, to stand tall when others stayed quiet, to use his voice for both love and justice. I Walk the Line may have been his most famous song, but the Ballad of Ira Hayes was perhaps his most courageous. Together they tell the story of Johnny Cash, a man who lived and sang on his own terms, even when it meant defying expectations. Johnny Cash's career reminds us that an artist's relationship with their work can be complicated, but that's what gives it power. Sometimes the song you least enjoy becomes the one that defines you. Sometimes the one that gets silenced ends up sparking the loudest conversations. And in Johnny Cash's case, it all blended into the legend of a man in black whose voice still echoes long after he's gone. In the end, Johnny Cash walked the line in more ways than one, between faith and doubt, between fame and authenticity, between silence and defiance. And maybe that's why, decades later, we're still talking about him. Not just about the songs he loved, but also the ones he didn't. Not just about his music, but about the man who stood behind it. Because Johnny Cash wasn't just a singer of songs. He was a voice for the voiceless, a man unafraid of contradictions, and a reminder that even in music, truth often walks a complicated line.